I left my farm for a year. When I came back, it was gone. The HOA bulldozed my land, erased my family's history, and built houses where my home used to stand. So I fought back, took them to court, exposed their fraud, and made them pay for every inch of damage. Now, my farm is rebuilt, the HOA is in ruins, and they learned the hard way. Some things aren't for sale. The late afternoon sun dipped toward the horizon, stretching golden light across the quiet countryside. Long shadows from towering oak trees sprawled over the gravel road as Matthew Lawson guided his old pickup truck toward home. The familiar crunch of tires on loose stone should have been comforting, but something about this drive felt different. He'd taken this road hundreds of times, yet today it felt almost foreign, as if the landscape itself had shifted in his absence. A year. That's how long it had been since he last pulled onto this road. A year since he'd left his 15-acre property behind to care for his sister in another state. He hadn't planned to be gone for so long, but life, as always, had other plans. Now, with his sister healthy again, he was finally coming back to the quiet solitude of the farm that had been in his family for 3 generations. The anticipation of homecoming should have brought relief, but unease crept up his spine instead. Matthew's fingers tightened on the steering wheel as he reached the bend in the road where his farm should have come into view. He knew every inch of that land, the rolling fields, the sturdy old barn, the grove of oak trees by the stream. It had been his sanctuary, a piece of earth that was his and his alone. But as the truck rounded the corner, a sight so jarring met his eyes that his foot slammed on the brake, kicking up a cloud of dust around him. The fields were gone. Instead of endless stretches of open land, he saw rows of houses, their skeletal wooden frames jutting against the orange-tinted sky. A construction site sprawled across the very ground where he had once walked barefoot as a kid. Matthew's heart pounded. This wasn't right. For a split second, he wondered if he had taken a wrong turn. But no, he knew this road, this land. It was his. Or at least it had been. The barn, the one he had repaired with his own hands more times than he could count, was gone. In its place sat a fresh cement foundation, as if the history of that old building had been wiped clean overnight. His breath came faster now. The gravel road he had installed himself was cluttered with heavy machinery, trucks, and construction crews moving like ants, hammering, measuring, shouting instructions to one another. Matthew's grip on the steering wheel turned his knuckles white. He had been gone a year. A single year. And in that time, it seemed like someone had decided his land was theirs to take. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a violation. Without a second thought, he threw the truck into park, shoved the door open, and stepped out. The air smelled of sawdust, wet earth, and fresh paint, mingling into something that made his stomach turn. Somewhere in the crowd of workers, a foreman in a hard hat turned and spotted him. The man gave a casual wave before returning to his clipboard, as if he belonged here, as if Matthew didn't. A storm of anger and disbelief brewed inside him. This was his land, and he was about to find out exactly who thought they had the right to take it. Matthew stormed toward the construction site, his boots kicking up dust with each determined step. His land, his home, had been turned into a war zone of trucks, scaffolding, and half-built houses, and the sight of it sent a surge of anger through his veins. Workers paused as he approached, their conversations trailing off as they noticed the look on his face. He locked eyes on the man with the clipboard, the foreman who had waved so casually, as if Matthew was just another passerby. "What the hell is going on here?" Matthew demanded, his voice sharp over the noise of the construction site. The foreman looked up, clearly caught off guard by the confrontation. He was a stocky man in his 40s, his face weathered from years of outdoor labor. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked, his tone polite but indifferent. Matthew crossed his arms, planting his feet firmly in the gravel. "Yeah, you can. You can explain why there are houses going up on my land." The foreman frowned, glancing at his clipboard before looking back at Matthew. I think you've got the wrong place," he said slowly, flipping through a few sheets of paper. "This is part of the Lakeside Homeowner Association development. We've been working on this site for months." Matthew's stomach dropped at the name. Lakeside Homeowner Association? He nearly spat the words out. "This is my farm. Been in my family for over 70 years. Who gave you the right to build here?" The foreman hesitated, his eyes shifting toward a sleek black SUV parked at the edge of the site. You'll want to talk to the project manager about that, he said, jerking his thumb in that direction. He handles all the permits and property stuff. Without another word, Matthew turned on his heel and marched toward the SUV. The door opened before he even reached it, and out stepped a man in a tailored suit, adjusting his tie as if he were about to walk into a boardroom instead of a construction site. His hair was neatly combed, his smile practiced but completely insincere. "Good afternoon," the man said, extending a hand. "I'm David Garrison, project manager for the Lakeside Homeowner Association development. What seems to be the issue?" Matthew ignored the handshake. "The issue," he said, voice tight with frustration, "is that you're building houses on my property without my permission. What part of it do you not understand?" David's smile faltered, but only slightly. He tilted his head in a way that felt patronizing, like he was speaking to someone who just didn't get it. "Oh, I see. Well, I assure you, Mr. Lawson," Matthew snapped. "Mr. Lawson," David continued smoothly, "this land was acquired legally through proper channels. Our records show it as part of the Lakeside Homeowner Association jurisdiction. If there's been some sort of mix-up, I'm sure we can sort it out." Matthew's hands clenched into fists. "A mix-up," he repeated, his voice rising. "This isn't some clerical error. I didn't sell my land. I didn't agree to anything. You're trespassing, plain and simple." David's expression hardened ever so slightly, the friendly facade cracking just enough to reveal the cold calculation beneath it. "I'm afraid I'll have to disagree. The zoning records we obtained from the county clearly show this parcel as part of the development. If you have concerns, I suggest you take them up with the county office." Matthew took a sharp breath, his pulse pounding. Before he could respond, the sound of heavy machinery caught his attention. He turned to see a crew unloading materials near what used to be his pasture. His blood boiled. "Get those trucks off my land right now," he shouted. The workers hesitated, glancing toward David for instruction. Without missing a beat, David raised a hand, signaling them to continue. "I'm sorry, Mr. Lawson," he said in a tone that dripped with condescension, "but we have a tight schedule to keep. Unless you can provide documentation proving your claims, we have no reason to halt construction." Matthew felt a surge of helplessness mixed with his rage. He had all the documentation, deeds, maps, surveys, stored safely in his house. But the very idea that he had to prove ownership of land he had lived on for decades was beyond infuriating. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," he said through gritted teeth. David gave a small shrug. "That's your right. Have a nice day, Mr. Lawson." Matthew turned and stalked back toward his truck, his mind spinning with anger and disbelief. His home, his history, and his future were all under threat, and the battle to reclaim what was rightfully his was only just beginning. The drive into town was long and tense, giving Matthew too much time to stew over what had just happened. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, replaying his conversation with David Garrison in his head, each word igniting fresh anger. His land, his family's land, was being stolen right in front of him, and somehow, the people responsible had the audacity to act like he was the one in the wrong. If there was a mistake in the records, he needed to fix it now. The only place to do that was the county zoning office. The building itself was a dull, windowless structure squeezed between an insurance agency and a rundown diner. Inside, the air was stale, the flickering fluorescent lights giving the space a lifeless, artificial glow. Rows of cramped cubicles stretched along the room, filled with employees pecking away at keyboards, barely acknowledging the people waiting in line. Matthew approached the front desk, where a receptionist with tired eyes and a bored expression was tapping away at her computer. She didn't look up when she spoke. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Matthew said, his voice firm. "I need to speak to someone about a serious mistake in your zoning records. My property, my private property, has been falsely registered as part of a homeowner association development." The receptionist finally looked up, her expression unreadable. "Do you have a parcel number?" Matthew pulled a well-worn map from his file, the edges creased from years of careful handling. He had highlighted the boundaries of his land years ago when he first inherited it. He jabbed a finger at the section that marked his property. "Right here." She took the map, typing the number into her system. A few moments later, her brow furrowed slightly. "Huh," she muttered, tilting the monitor. "It's showing up as part of the Lakeside Homeowner Association jurisdiction." Matthew's patience snapped. "That's the problem," he said sharply. "It's not. I've owned this land for decades. I have the deed, surveys, everything to prove it's mine." The receptionist sighed, as if this was just another minor inconvenience in her day. "You'll need to talk to the zoning supervisor," she said, pointing toward a row of cubicles. Second desk on the left. His name's Paul. Matthew didn't waste a second. He strode toward the desk, where a balding man in his late 40s sat hunched over a stack of papers, a pair of reading glasses perched low on his nose. When Matthew reached the desk, Paul barely glanced up. "I'm busy," he said, still scribbling notes on a document. "Not anymore," Matthew shot back, slamming his file down on the desk. "You've got a serious problem in your records, and I need answers." Paul finally looked up, squinting at Matthew before pushing his glasses higher on his nose. "All right," he sighed, setting down his pen. "Let's hear it." Matthew explained the situation, how he had returned home only to find his land being torn apart by developers who claimed they had legal rights to it. Paul's expression shifted from vague disinterest to mild concern as Matthew spoke. "Let me pull up the file," he said, turning to his computer. As Paul typed, Matthew could hear the rhythmic tapping of the keyboard, each click stretching his patience thinner. A few moments later, Paul let out a low whistle. "Well, there's your issue," he said, swiveling the monitor toward Matthew. Matthew leaned in, his stomach sinking as he read the information on the screen. His property had been mistakenly included in a rezoning project 2 years ago. Paul rubbed his temple. This was supposed to cover just the area surrounding the lakeside development, but somehow, your parcel got added to the map. Asterisk asterisk somehow? Asterisk asterisk, Matthew repeated, his voice rising. "You're telling me my land was stolen because of a clerical error?" Paul held up a hand as if to calm him down. "It wasn't stolen. It's a zoning issue. Technically, the homeowner association doesn't own your land. They just think they do because of this map." Matthew let out a bitter laugh. "Well, they're building houses on my land as we speak. Does that sound like they think they own it?" Paul winced. "Yeah, that's not good. They shouldn't have started construction without verifying ownership. This definitely needs to be corrected." Matthew exhaled sharply, trying to keep his anger from boiling over. "Then fix it. Now," Paul sighed, reaching behind him to pull out a thick binder labeled County Records Office Procedures. He flipped through a few pages before shaking his head. "It's not that simple," he admitted. "We'll need to file a correction request, and that has to go through the County Records Office. It's a process." Matthew's jaw tightened. "How long?" Paul hesitated. "Could take weeks, maybe months." Matthew slammed his fist onto the desk, making Paul jump. "I don't have months. Every day they're out there, they're tearing up my land." Paul ran a hand over his face. "I get it, I do," he said. "Look, I'll do what I can to expedite the correction. But in the meantime, you should file a cease and desist order to stop construction." Matthew groaned. "So you're saying I have to go through legal battles for land that I already own?" Paul gave a sympathetic shrug. "Welcome to bureaucracy." Matthew gritted his teeth, stuffing the printed forms Paul handed him into his file. This wasn't just a mistake, it was an injustice. And if he had to fight to get back what was already his, then so be it. It was time to find a lawyer. Matthew stepped into the law office of Barbara Klein, his file clutched tightly in one hand, his patience nearly depleted. The small firm was tucked between a bail bonds office and a tax service, its modest sign reading Klein and Associates, property law specialists. He didn't need a fancy attorney with a towering office building. He needed someone who knew how to fight. Someone who wasn't afraid to go up against a homeowner association with deep pockets and no conscience. Inside, the office was tidy but cramped with stacks of legal books and boxes labeled pending cases. The scent of coffee and old paper filled the air. Behind a large oak desk sat Barbara Klein, a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue. She wore a no-nonsense gray blazer, her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun. The kind of woman who didn't waste time on small talk. "You Matthew Lawson?" she asked, barely looking up from the paperwork she was reviewing. "Yeah." He dropped the file onto her desk. "I need a lawyer. A damn good one." She finally glanced up, her lips curving in something close to amusement. "That's the only kind I am." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Let's hear it." Matthew wasted no time. He laid out everything, his family's land, the zoning error, the developer's arrogance, and the construction that had started without his permission. Barbara listened carefully, occasionally flipping through his documents, nodding as he spoke. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair and tapped a pen against her desk. "Well," she said, "you've got a damn good case. Deed, tax records, survey reports, it's all airtight. They never had a legal right to your land. The zoning mistake complicates things, but that doesn't change the fact that this is yours. So what do we do? Matthew asked, his frustration evident. Barbara flipped open her legal pad. First step, we file a cease and desist order to stop construction. That'll buy us time while we sort out the zoning mess. If they keep building after receiving it, that'll only work in our favor in court. Matthew exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. And if they ignore it? Barbara smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it. Then we sue. Hard. She wasted no time drafting the cease and desist order, making sure every word carried weight. By the time Matthew walked out of her office an hour later, the document was filed, set to be delivered to the Lakeside Homeowner Association the next morning. For the first time in days, Matthew felt like he was taking back control. Hashtag. The next morning, Matthew returned to his property, fully expecting to see the construction site shut down. The order had been served. The Homeowner Association had been legally notified. This should have been the end of it, at least for now. Instead, as his truck rumbled down the gravel road, his stomach twisted into knots. The site was still alive with activity. Workers hammered away, trucks unloaded fresh materials, and the sound of power tools filled the air. It was as if the legal order meant absolutely nothing. Matthew slammed the truck into park and jumped out, rage boiling over. He spotted the foreman from before, the same man who had dismissed him like some lost tourist. The man glanced up, saw Matthew, and sighed *** as if dealing with him was an inconvenience. ***. I thought I made myself clear, Matthew said, storming toward him. This is my land, and you have no right to be here. The foreman wiped sweat from his brow and crossed his arms. Look, mister, I just do what I'm told. We haven't received any orders to stop. Matthew pulled the cease and desist order from his back pocket and shoved it toward the man's chest. You got one now. The foreman took it, barely skimming the contents before exhaling heavily. Gonna have to take this up with the boss. Yeah, Matthew said, his tone sharp. Then get your boss on the damn phone, because if I see one more nail go into that wood, I'm calling the sheriff. The foreman hesitated, then nodded. Fine. Wait here. Matthew didn't move as the man disappeared toward the sleek black SUV parked near the construction trailers. A few minutes later, David Garrison emerged, his suit just as pressed, his expression just as smug as before. Mr. Lawson, David greeted, his voice smooth as ever. What a surprise. What can I do for you? Matthew clenched his jaw. You got served a legal order to stop building on my property. Why the hell are your guys still working? David sighed as if Matthew was some annoying child who didn't understand how the world worked. Ah, yes. The cease and desist order. Unfortunately, Mr. Lawson, that's not quite how things work. Matthew stepped forward, his voice dropping. Oh? And how do they work, David? David gave a slow, condescending shrug. A cease and desist is a request. A strongly worded one, sure, but it's not legally binding unless enforced by a judge. And unfortunately, we haven't been ordered by a judge to stop construction yet. Matthew's fists clenched at his sides. You think you can just ignore the law? David smiled, and it was the most infuriating thing Matthew had ever seen. I think I can operate within the law, Mr. Lawson. Matthew took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. You can keep acting like this is just business, he said, voice low, but you're gonna regret it. David chuckled, clearly unfazed. I look forward to it. Matthew turned on his heel, storming back to his truck, his blood boiling. This wasn't just about a legal battle anymore. This was war. Matthew drove straight back to Barbara Klein's office, his mind set on one thing, escalation. If the Homeowner Association wanted a fight, they were damn well going to get one. The cease and desist order had been a joke to them, but now it was time to hit them with something they couldn't ignore. Barbara was already at her desk when Matthew stormed in. She looked up from her paperwork, arching an eyebrow. Judging by that expression, I'm guessing they didn't stop construction. They laughed in my face, Matthew growled, tossing his crumpled cease and desist order onto her desk. David Garrison basically told me it means nothing without a judge backing it up. Said they weren't legally obligated to stop. Barbara's lips pressed into a thin line. That son of a she cut herself off, exhaling sharply. All right, if they won't listen to a cease and desist, we take the next step. We file for an injunction. Matthew leaned against her desk, arms crossed. What's that going to do? Barbara grabbed a legal pad and started jotting notes. An injunction is a court order that legally forces them to halt all activity until this mess is sorted out. If they ignore it, that's contempt of court, and that comes with serious consequences. She looked up at him. It's the difference between asking them to stop and forcing them to stop. Matthew liked the sound of that. How fast can we make it happen? Barbara nodded toward the stack of papers on her desk. I'll draft the motion today. We'll submit it to the court first thing tomorrow morning. But if we really want to shut them down for good, we need to gather evidence. The more we have to prove they knowingly built on your land without rights, the stronger our case will be. Matthew nodded. Where do we start? Barbara leaned forward. We subpoena their records. ####. The process moved fast. Within days, Barbara had filed a subpoena for all communications related to the Lakeside Homeowner Association's development. Emails, construction permits, zoning correspondence, ***, anything that could prove they knew the land wasn't theirs, ***. The Homeowner Association's lawyers tried to fight it, but the judge approved the request, forcing them to hand over documents. Barbara had been expecting a fight. What she hadn't been expecting was how much dirt she'd find. A week later, Matthew sat in Barbara's office as she sifted through a thick folder of emails and internal memos. She had been reading for almost an hour, her brow furrowing deeper with every page. Finally, she let out a slow breath and leaned back in her chair. Well, she said, setting the papers down. They're screwed. Matthew straightened. What did you find? Barbara pushed the stack toward him. Multiple internal emails from the Lakeside Homeowner Association board proving they knew about the zoning error before construction even started. Matthew grabbed one of the emails and scanned it. The subject line alone made his blood run cold. Lawson property, proceeding with development despite zoning issue. His eyes darted over the words, his pulse pounding. *, we are aware of the discrepancy with the Lawson parcel. However, delaying construction at this stage is not an option. The likelihood of Lawson successfully challenging this in court is low, and by the time any legal action is taken, the project will be too far along to reverse. Recommend moving forward as planned. *. Matthew slammed the page onto the desk. They knew, he said through clenched teeth. They knew my land wasn't legally theirs, and they built anyway. Barbara flipped to another email, tapping the page. Here's another one, even worse. *, even if Lawson contests it, we can tie him up in legal proceedings for years. By the time it's resolved, the houses will be finished, and he won't have the resources to undo it. Worst case scenario, we settle out of court for less than the cost of halting construction. *. Matthew's vision blurred with rage. They had counted on him giving up, counted on him not being able to fight back. Barbara watched him carefully. This isn't just negligence anymore. This is willful fraud. They knew the zoning was wrong. They knew the land wasn't legally theirs, and they moved forward anyway. That's going to look really bad in front of a judge. Matthew forced himself to breathe. What's our next move? Barbara smirked. We take these emails straight to court and nail them to the wall. The courtroom was packed, the tension thick as Matthew sat at the plaintiff's table beside Barbara Klein, his hands clenched together as he watched the proceedings unfold. Across from them, the Lakeside Homeowner Association's legal team sat with an air of confidence. Their lead attorney, Richard Calloway, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, flipping through his notes with practiced ease. The board members sat behind him, their faces carefully neutral, but Matthew could see the way they occasionally whispered to one another, their expressions flickering with unease. Judge Eleanor Pierce, a stern woman known for her sharp intellect and no-nonsense demeanor, took her seat at the bench and surveyed the room with a look that silenced everyone instantly. Let's begin, she said firmly. This court is convened to address the case of Lawson versus the Lakeside Homeowner Association regarding the alleged illegal occupation and development of private property. Both sides will have the opportunity to present their arguments and evidence. Mr. Calloway, you may begin. Calloway rose smoothly, buttoning his suit jacket as he walked toward the judge. Your Honor, the Lakeside Homeowner Association is a respected organization committed to community development. This entire situation stems from nothing more than an innocent clerical error in the county's zoning records. While we acknowledge that Mr. Lawson's property was mistakenly included in our project, the association acted in good faith, following the information available at the time. Halting construction now would result in significant financial losses and negatively impact future homeowners who have already made commitments to these properties. His voice was even, professional, carefully crafted to sound reasonable. This case is nothing more than a misunderstanding, he concluded, offering a mild smile. Matthew felt his fists clench under the table. A misunderstanding. They had knowingly built on his land, ignored legal orders, and now had the audacity to pretend it was all just an unfortunate mistake. He exhaled sharply, trying to keep his anger in check as Barbara stood up, smoothing her blazer before stepping forward. "Your Honor, this is not a case of community development or a simple clerical mistake. This is a case of deliberate, willful fraud. Mr. Lawson's property has been in his family for generations. The defendants did not just mistakenly build on his land. They knew about the zoning error and proceeded anyway, assuming he wouldn't have the means to fight back. We have evidence that proves this." Calloway didn't flinch, but Matthew saw the way his jaw tightened slightly as Barbara lifted a thick folder of printed emails and walked toward the judge's bench. These are internal emails from the Lakeside Homeowner Association's board, obtained through subpoena. They show that the board members knew as early as a year ago that Mr. Lawson's property was not legally included in their development, but chose to move forward anyway. She handed a copy to the judge, then turned back toward the jury. One particular email from the president of the association explicitly states, and I quote, "Even if Lawson contests it, we can tie him up in legal proceedings for years. By the time it's resolved, the houses will be finished, and he won't have the resources to undo it." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Pierce raised a hand, silencing the whispers as she flipped through the documents. Her expression remained unreadable, but there was a sharp glint in her eye as she read over the evidence. Barbara continued, her voice strong, unwavering. "The homeowner association did not act in good faith. They knowingly moved forward with construction, assuming they could steamroll my client into submission. And when he refused to back down, they ignored legal orders to stop and continued building as if they were untouchable." She turned toward the jury. If this case were just about a zoning mistake, the association would have stopped construction the moment the issue was brought to their attention. Instead, they continued, because they thought they could get away with it. Calloway cleared his throat, standing again with an overly calm expression, as if none of this fazed him. "Your Honor, we do not deny that the zoning error existed, but there is no concrete proof that the entire board acted with malicious intent. The statements in those emails, while regrettable, do not reflect the actions of the organization as a whole. The Lakeside Homeowner Association has made every effort to comply with legal processes, and halting construction now would create unnecessary hardship." Judge Pierce arched an eyebrow. "Are you telling me that emails directly stating intentional legal obstruction do not count as proof?" Calloway hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. "We believe the bigger picture must be considered." Barbara cut in smoothly, "Your Honor, the bigger picture is this. If organizations like the Lakeside Homeowner Association are allowed to blatantly violate private property rights, where does it stop? If this case is ruled in their favor, what's to stop other developers from claiming land that doesn't belong to them, assuming they can wear down the rightful owners through endless legal battles? This is about more than just Mr. Lawson's farm. This is about property rights, accountability, and whether or not laws actually mean something." Judge Pierce turned her attention back to Calloway, who looked significantly less confident than he had at the start of the trial. "Mr. Calloway, I want a direct answer. Did the Homeowner Association knowingly proceed with development after being made aware of the zoning mistake?" Calloway hesitated, and that 3-second pause was all the confirmation the courtroom needed. "Your Honor," he finally said, his voice quieter, "we acknowledge that mistakes were made, and we are willing to explore settlement options." Barbara's eyes flashed with victory as she looked toward Matthew. This wasn't just about settlement anymore. They were winning. The judge's gavel struck with a decisive thud, silencing the courtroom as the final ruling was delivered. The Lakeside Homeowner Association was found liable for trespassing, illegal development, and willful negligence. They were ordered to halt all construction immediately, pay damages to Matthew, and, most importantly, restore his land to its original state. The ruling was a landslide victory, ***, justice served in its purest form, ***. Matthew sat in stunned silence for a moment, letting the reality sink in. He had won. After months of fighting, sleepless nights, and the constant fear that he might lose the very land his family had built their lives on, the battle was over. He glanced at Barbara, who gave him a small nod, satisfaction clear in her sharp eyes. Across the aisle, the Homeowner Association's legal team looked deflated. Their lead attorney, Calloway, rubbing his temple as if trying to process how thoroughly they had been outmaneuvered. But the fallout didn't stop at the ruling. News of the case spread fast, with local media picking up the story, turning it into a cautionary tale of corporate overreach versus individual rights. The Lakeside Homeowner Association's reputation took a severe hit. Board members began resigning one by one, their carefully curated images shattered. The financial penalties were severe, but the public backlash was worse. No one wanted to be associated with an organization that had tried to bulldoze a family farm out of existence. Yet, as satisfying as the victory was, Matthew knew the real work was just beginning. The land had been scarred by months of construction. Where rolling fields once stood, there were now deep tire tracks from heavy machinery, patches of dirt where grass had been torn away, and piles of discarded materials that had to be cleared. But the worst of it was the barn. The sturdy old structure that had stood for generations, repaired time and time again by his own hands, was gone, replaced by a cement foundation that had no place on his farm. Watching the court-ordered cleanup begin, Matthew felt a strange mix of emotions. He had his land back, but it wasn't the same. The land would heal, but it would take time. So he did the only thing he could do. He started rebuilding. The first order of business was the barn. With the compensation awarded from the case, Matthew hired local builders, people who understood the value of what had been lost. He worked alongside them, refusing to just stand by and watch. He wanted his hands in every nail, every wooden beam, making sure it wasn't just a structure but a true part of the farm's history again. As word spread, neighbors began showing up to help, some bringing tools, others bringing food, all of them understanding that this was more than just construction. It was a symbol of resilience. Even those who had never set foot on his farm before knew what he had fought for, and they wanted to be part of putting it back together. Weeks passed, and slowly, the land began to look like itself again. Grass was replanted, the damaged soil treated, the debris cleared. Wildlife returned, the stream by the oak grove ran clear again, and for the first time in months, the farm felt whole. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, Matthew stood in front of the newly completed barn, the wood fresh and strong, the structure standing proud against the fading light. He reached out and ran his hand along the grain of the wood, feeling the life in it, the history that would continue through him. Above the barn doors, a simple wooden plaque had been mounted, its letters carved deep. Lawson Family Farm, established 1938. It wasn't just a barn, it was a statement. Matthew turned, taking in the sight of his land, whole again. It had been a brutal fight, but he had stood his ground, and he had won. The Lakeside Homeowner Association had underestimated him, assuming he was just another landowner they could push around. But they had learned the hard way, some things aren't for sale, And this land? This land would remain his. The court's ruling had been final, but for Matthew, the battle wasn't truly over until his land was whole again. The Lakeside Homeowner Association had been ordered to halt all construction, remove every trace of their development, and restore the property to its original condition. In addition, they were slapped with financial penalties, including full compensation for damages, legal fees, and emotional distress. The blow to their reputation was even worse. With media coverage framing the case as a classic David versus Goliath fight, the Homeowner Association found itself drowning in public outrage. Board members started resigning one by one, unwilling to be associated with an organization that had knowingly tried to steal a man's land. Despite the victory, Matthew knew undoing months of damage wouldn't happen overnight. His land had been transformed into a war zone, where his pastures once thrived, now stood deep scars left by bulldozers and trucks. His barn, the heart of his farm, was gone, reduced to nothing but a cement slab that had no place in his family's legacy. Even with the court forcing the association to restore the land, he refused to sit back and wait. This was his farm, his home, and he was going to rebuild it with his own hands. The restoration process began with tearing down what didn't belong. Court-appointed contractors arrived to dismantle the unfinished houses, removing every structure that had been illegally erected. Cement foundations were jackhammered, construction debris was hauled away, and heavy machinery was finally taken off his land for good. It was slow, exhausting work, but each load of debris removed felt like another piece of his farm being returned to him. But the real moment of reckoning came when he stood on the empty space where the barn used to be. The sight of it missing hit him harder than he expected. That barn had been more than just a building. It had been a part of his family's story, a structure that had stood through storms, repairs, and generations of work. It had been there long before the Lakeside Homeowner Association tried to claim his land, and it damn sure was going to be there long after they were gone. So he got to work. With the compensation from the case, Matthew hired a team of local builders, people who understood what the barn meant and respected its history. He worked alongside them, hammering, lifting, doing whatever he could to make sure the new barn wasn't just a replacement, but a tribute to everything that had come before it. The design honored the original structure, built with stronger wood, reinforced beams, and a loft for storage, just like the old one. As news of the rebuild spread, neighbors started showing up to help. Some brought tools, others brought food, and a few just came to offer their support, standing alongside him as he rebuilt what had been taken from him. It wasn't just about his farm anymore, it was about what the land represented. When the barn was finally finished, Matthew stepped back and took it all in. It stood tall and strong, a blend of the old and the new, a statement that no matter what had been done to his land, he had reclaimed it. Above the doors, he mounted a wooden plaque, the letters carved deep. Lawson Family Farm, established 1938. That night, he invited everyone who had stood by him for a gathering beneath the oak trees. They sat under the stars, talking, laughing, sharing stories, not just about what had happened, but about why it had mattered. When the time came, Matthew stood before them, raising a glass. "This farm has seen its share of storms, but it's still standing," he said, his voice steady and clear. What happened here wasn't just about land. It was about fighting for what's right. For the principle that no one, no matter how powerful, no matter how rich, has the right to take what isn't theirs. And I couldn't have done this alone. To all of you who stood by me, who fought with me, who never let me give up, I can't thank you enough. This barn, this farm, it's not just mine. It's ours." The cheers that followed carried across the fields, a sound of victory, of resilience, of justice finally served. Months passed, and the land healed. Grass regrew, the soil settled, and the scars left by the construction faded. Wildlife returned to the stream, the oak grove stood untouched, and for the first time in a long time, Matthew felt at peace. He still worked the farm, but now, he also used his experience to help others fight back against land grabs and corrupt development practices, speaking at community events and advocating for stronger property rights protections. One evening, as he stood on his porch, watching the sun set over his land, he felt something deeper than relief, a sense of permanence, of belonging, of knowing that this place would remain his for generations to come. The fight had been long. The scars would always remain. But Matthew Lawson had stood his ground and won. The victory was Matthew's, but it didn't belong to him alone. The moment the court's ruling became public, the community rallied behind him, turning his fight into something bigger than just one man defending his land. What had started as a legal battle against a corrupt homeowner association became a symbol of resistance, a message that people weren't powerless against corporations and bureaucracies that thought they could take whatever they wanted. The news coverage exploded, not just in the local papers but in national outlets. Reporters framed the case as a David versus Goliath story, painting Matthew as the hard-working farmer who had stood his ground against a well-funded organization that thought they could bully him into submission. Interviews, opinion pieces, and legal analysts all picked apart the case, discussing the loopholes that allowed it to happen in the first place and what could be done to prevent it from happening again. People who had never met Matthew before reached out, letters, emails, even strangers showing up at his farm, shaking his hand and thanking him for fighting back. Some had faced similar battles with developers, losing land that had been in their families for generations because they didn't have the resources to fight it. Others simply saw in him the kind of courage they hoped to have if they were ever put in his position. His farm, once a quiet, isolated place, became something of a landmark. People wanted to see it, to walk the land he had fought for. Local leaders started discussing policy changes, using his case as an example of why property laws needed to be stricter, why zoning errors couldn't be brushed aside, and why homeowner associations needed more oversight. Despite the attention, Matthew never saw himself as some kind of hero. He wasn't looking for recognition. He had only ever wanted what was his to stay his. But standing in front of his newly rebuilt barn, surrounded by the people who had supported him, he realized the fight had become more than just about his farm. At a community event held in his honor, Matthew stepped forward to address the crowd. He wasn't a public speaker, didn't like the idea of standing in front of people with all eyes on him, but this time, he knew he had something worth saying. I never wanted this fight, he admitted, his voice steady but raw. I never expected to be standing here, talking about legal battles and court rulings. All I ever wanted was to come home to my land, to my family's farm, to what's always been ours. But when I saw what was happening, when I saw how they were trying to take it from me, I realized something: if I didn't fight back, who would? If I let them get away with it, how many more people would they do this to? How many families would wake up one day to find their homes bulldozed because someone decided the paperwork said they could? The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. He took a breath, looking out at the people who had stood with him through it all. This fight wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. About what we stand for. About making sure that no one, no corporation, no lawyer, no bureaucrat, can take what belongs to us just because they think we don't have the power to stop them. A wave of applause and cheers erupted, filling the air with a sense of triumph. He looked toward Barbara, who gave him a rare smile, arms crossed, clearly satisfied that they hadn't just won the case, they had set a precedent. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, Matthew stood on his porch, watching the land stretch out before him, whole again, untouched by the greed that had tried to claim it. His farm was safe. His fight was over. But the legacy of his battle, the message that people had the right to protect what was theirs, would live on far beyond him. He had never set out to inspire change. But somehow, by standing his ground, he had.